Well, today on Rethink Real Estate, we're going to just be doing something a little bit different and different format is that Jesse Salas and I did a webinar recently for agents external to our network around how to use auction to get a price reduction. It was a really interesting conversation because we'd taken a whole bunch of questions. We'd ran social media ads and asked questions to people around what is the biggest challenge that they have with listings that are stagnant at the moment. And we basically go through a lot of those questions in the infrastructure of this session with talking about how, in fact, taking a different strategy of the auction process can actually benefit you in maybe the seller doesn't want to do auction, but 90% of the time it results in a seller then adjusting their expectation and you getting a price reduction through the traditional sense anyway, because there's a greater appreciation of them being brought something that isn't just simply a price reduction. Again, we'll go deeper into it in the episode, but we kept the recording of it because I really like the back and forward that Jesse and I were having. We share a whole bunch of examples of different properties that have gone through traditional, then converted to auction, and a whole different element of circumstances that have come out of it from our experience. So either way, hopefully there's value in it and hopefully you enjoy. Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. Might just officially kick things off with a couple of people that are here that have just joined us now just recently in the waiting room as well, in the attendees list. Officially welcome along, folks. Harcourts Auctions is our company name. We do non-distressed auctions. My name is Ben Brady. I'm the CEO and founder of Harcourts Auctions here in North America. Jesse Salas is our director of auctions. He works out of the South Miami market and also Southern California marketplace as well. He's one of our auction pioneers who's been doing this from the very beginning, really, of us moving the non-distressed auction process to North America. So again, a great resource for us on the call today. Welcome along, mate. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, bud. Thanks for having me.
So today's agenda for those that are playing at home, so to speak, is that I want to just quickly go along and sort of just give you a bit of a lay of the land. We're going to just go through just quickly a little bit about what we do and who we are. I'm going to spend a quick couple of minutes on that. But then primarily the focus of today is actually sort of trying to give you something as agents that are out there in the community that might have listings on the marketplace at the moment, or a listing coming up, or an opportunity where you might be competing against somebody where, one, you can either stand out from the pack of having something different. Two, if you've got a listing that's on the market that might not be moving as quickly as what you ultimately like, how do you partner with the Harcourts Auctions team and use us as a part of your business, maybe to offer a different point of view to your sellers rather than simply just a price reduction? We'll go through that a little bit today. I want to talk a little bit about markets, because one of the great insights that, Jesse and I were just talking about, he's got incredible insight at the Southern California market and then also the South Miami or South Florida marketplace. I'm doing auctions in, I believe it's about 15 states at the moment, across the US. So giving you guys some insights to what's happening, because it is vastly different from state to state at the moment. It really is. And it's different at all different types of price points as well. So I want to give everybody a little bit of a synopsis of that. But realistically, just going through and giving you some statistics in each one of those markets that might be able to help you in your conversations with your clients, with your sellers as well. But before we go too deeply into, the practicality of today, is that, as mentioned, is that, our primary focus is to partner with listing agents on their listings that might be, a little bit slower on the marketplace, trying to market it a little bit differently, add a spotlight onto that property, provide an absolute solution in a situation where that listing might be a tiny bit stagnant. The other part of this as well that Jesse can speak to a little bit, and we can probably do a little bit more of that later today in the session, Jesse. And you've spoken about it before on our podcast. If anybody's interested in going to, it's Rethink Real Estate. You can look that up anywhere that you can get your podcast from. Obviously on our YouTube channel as well. Speaking about how you've added auction as a department of your business as a traditional selling listing agent. Okay, as sort of you've created this whole option agent, is what you call it, option. Okay,
yep.
Where you're offering both auction and traditional, so that therefore you can use it in a point of difference in a listing presentation, but also going after some of the expired listings in the marketplace, but then also offering it as another tool in the tool belt when you traditionally list a property and it's not moving, to then add that as well. Do you want to speak to that, like the diversity a little bit, Jesse? I think that this might be a good time to do so.
Yeah, I think as real estate agents, we've been doing things the same way for some time, right? Some great coaches out there that teach us the same way to sell properties. And the struggle that I have with that is that we come in with this great listing presentation and sell ourselves and, essentially promise a particular price, right? And I get it. In some cases, we probably overpromise. Right. Maybe because of what's happened over the past 4 or 5 years where things were just selling, at any price point. And maybe because in today's market, there's not many listings out there. And when we have the opportunity to be in front of a seller, we want to get that listing contract signed, even if in the back of our mind, we know that it's probably overpriced, right?
And it's the wrong time to educate them in the listing presentation if you want to get that business. Let's be honest. Yeah.
Exactly. Somebody's going to tell them exactly what they want to hear. So, we're all guilty of it. What I felt like is we could do better, right? We could be slightly more dynamic with our listing presentation. And the word option agent as opposed to auction agent came up because just statistically, customers tend to have a better customer experience if they have options, right? In addition to that, the alternative close comes into play using a sales term where, a customer is more likely to choose one of the two options if there are two options available versus just one. So whether it's me being at the listing presentation suggesting auction or traditional, or let's say we already have the listing in place, but we're trying to go for that price reduction by being able to offer the price reduction and or the idea of the auction, they're more likely to choose one of those two versus just going in and trying to hammer them with a price reduction. And that's, I'll go full circle here. That's what tends to happen is we promise them a price. And then 2 weeks later, when it doesn't sell, we come in and we hammer them into submission to lower the price by simply saying the market has spoken. And there's just too much friction that we create. The relationship goes sour from that honeymoon phase I've heard you use, and I love that, right? So now all of a sudden you're no longer an ally. You're no longer a team trying to sell this property. You're now on the other side of the line. You're against the seller because the seller had expectations of this price that you agreed upon, and now they're no longer there. So by having options, that has really allowed me to, I think, just build a little bit more trust and confidence with the seller and allow them to choose one of the choices that I'm going to ultimately just giving me a better opportunity to get where I need to get to have the property sold.
And I think that Jesse, you've hit on a really good point there about, the client experience when they've got options. I think that this serves, and again, I'm just probably going to repeat some of the stuff you've said, but realistically is that I think that it presents them with an option. Let's say that in a listing presentation, if you're in a presentation with a seller, regardless of whether you've got an established relationship with that seller or you don't, the first thing that it allows you to do is say to them, okay, how much do you want for your property? Well, I want, $2 million. Now let's face it, in a lot of marketplaces that we're in, is that, and we'll give a little bit of a market overview here shortly, but in a lot of marketplaces that we're in, death, taxes, and sellers want too much for their home in the beginning are probably the three certainties in life. There's no question about that. And I don't think that I don't begrudge a seller for wanting more money, and I don't find it greedy most of the time. I think that the reality is they just want to go through the process of elimination of knowing that they couldn't get that number if it was possible. So sometimes you do have to take that property to marketplace for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, whatever that process of elimination looks like for that seller at their price point. And the way that I would put it to a seller and have done in the past is, let's put it on at your price, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. Let's see if there's any low-hanging fruit out there. But then instead of me coming back to you in 2, 3, 4 weeks' time and asking you to reduce your price, I'm going to offer you something different that we have in our wheelhouse, which is a non-distressed auction to really engage a different portion of the market and cast the net wider. Now, the reason that I want to use the word auction in this situation is that I think that I want to pause that dialogue, and I want to point out something here is that in that particular moment of time, you've already gone through and shown them that you're not just going to come back and do a price reduction, because I think you can point out to a seller at that moment, if you do one price reduction, now this is an average across most of the markets that we're operating in, Jesse. If you do one price reduction on a property, there is a 72% likelihood there needs to be 2 more before that property goes into escrow or under contract, depending on what terminology you use, depending on what state you're from. And I think that it erodes away any type of leverage you have in that negotiation the moment you do a price reduction. Do you agree with that?
100%. And what about the sweet spot of a listing being the first 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the market, in some cases 4 weeks? After 3 price reductions, that sweet spot has sailed. You've lost that. By the time you get to that effective price, you've lost all the momentum. So for that reason as well, I 100% agree.
Yeah. So I think that that's a really soft approach in the beginning of the listing. And if you were to show them that you had different options that you could explore, I think that if you're in a competitive listing, it shows, an advantage to you. But if it's just an established client and it's a referral based piece of business and they go onto the marketplace at a price, like I've got a situation at the moment with a lady in the Bay Area. She's got a property. It's actually on the same block as where she lives. It's one of her neighbors that's currently on the market at 3,599. And she's like, I'm just absolutely gobsmacked that I haven't had the volume of people that I need through it in order to sell it, or I haven't had the interest. Sometimes we are shocked as agents that the market hasn't responded the way that we wanted them to. So again, instead of making, and as I said to her, what would be your next price reduction? And she said, look, I probably have to drop it below 3.2 million to get some activity. And I'm like, do you really think that? I think you probably need to do 299 to actually attract a different market. And that's a substantial reduction. She's like, you're probably right, but they will never go for that. So this is where auction allows us to drop the value without having to drop the seller's expectations or their hope to get more. I think squashing hope is where the friction comes into play, Jesse. In that situation, like I'm sure that you've been there traditionally previously where you've suggested a larger price reduction, and regardless of whether it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, that reaction to the seller in your relationship takes a hit, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it reminds me of a client that I have right now who's been on the market previously with a good agent, good property, just in a rural area, big home, hasn't sold. We took the listing on, and what is interesting about this is I was competing against two other agents. When I came back for the second appointment, the owner said, I'm going to be honest with you. You guys are all very similar. You're all good. You all have experience, and we're just not sure where to go. So here's your 15 minutes to kind of sell us. What else do you have out there? And I went a different approach. I said, hey, look, we've all sat here for a couple hours, maybe some more, talking about how good we are and how we're going to sell the property fast. But let's say that doesn't happen. Let's go the alternative. Let's say the home doesn't sell the way we want it to. Then what happens? What is the plan B for everybody else? And I would argue that it would be a price reduction.
Exactly. That's so powerful, mate. That's so powerful.
It got us the listing. The husband's on board with auction, the wife not so much, and we weren't going to force anything down. But the goal here is auction or not is to get the listing and to develop that relationship over this time that I have right now. And things are slow right now. They've already now come back to me saying, hey, look, we might need to explore that auction option, a little bit sooner than we thought. And so just pointing out the possibilities of things not going the way you'd like them to go was enough for them to say, whew, we never thought of it that way. Right. And here we are now with the listing. So I think that, there's sellers. The similarity you have across the country right now is every seller wants more than what the property is probably worth. And we've talked about this. Many of them probably overpaid for it over the past 4 or 5 years. And they now want the buyer to also overpay, in a sense, maybe to correct some of the mistakes that they had. And it's just not happening right now. And so this may not be in line with your agenda, but you've brought this up a couple of times. I think there needs to be a relationship and some trust that's built at the very beginning to make sure that when you have these conversations, they're looking at you as an advisor as opposed to somebody that's just coming in and just kind of forcing something down their throat.
Yeah, it's just I want to highlight something that you said there. Like it is a little bit off topic, but be able to show them that, hey, what happens if we don't get you the result you want? What do you think everyone else is going to do? They're going to recommend a price reduction. With us, we have a different alternative that we've trained in. We have a department. We have whatever way you want to introduce the Harcourts auctions team as a part of your business. I think that's the appropriate element of doing so. I think that's where I want to lead this, mate. I want to lead this now for people that are either watching a recording or here today with us on the webinar. What is the easiest way that you've had to introduce auction into your business? Because again, you're an agent that has been helping us sort of adapt this process to North America for the last 10 years. We're a separate portion to your business. How have you sort of brought the auction team in as a third party? How have you introduced that conversation? Have you introduced that, like, have you just gotten good enough that you can speak to it, or do you find it better to bring people in to present it? Like, how do you bring it up with your sellers?
Well, I think both, right? I think, I've been doing this a lot, but having you there or anybody else on the auction team in the past has been very helpful because, sometimes different personalities gel differently, right? We all judge, it's human nature. We judge people like that. And maybe somebody likes hearing the exact same verbiage from me versus somebody else. It's just, I think having a second person there will never actually hurt. It'll never harm, the likelihood of me getting the listing. What I do like to introduce though, I like to hit on the pain points of a seller. For me and personally, my business where I really introduced auction and it thrived was working with homes that hadn't sold, right? Those expired listings, whether they were my own listings that maybe were sitting on the market or more likely, another good agent that had the listing that couldn't get it sold. For me, that was an easy opportunity to come in and to grow my business. And knowing that every one of those sellers was frustrated with the agent, but also frustrated with the process, right? The showings, keeping the house clean all the time, the constant lack of communication because eventually agents are just frustrated. There's pain points that are consistent with almost every single seller. And the beauty of the auction is it corrects those pain points, right? It's something that traditional real estate really can't offer. And so by introducing those subtle differences, it allowed the seller's mind to open up a little bit more, right? To the idea of doing something that maybe they hadn't heard of. That was a great way for me to introduce the conversation and ultimately, get that listing.
Yeah, great. Well, I think that, that's part of the process that I want to sort of lean upon now is that the opinion that most sellers have had of their agent once they've introduced the auction team. So how our relationship typically works with most agents is that we'll sort of reach out to them if their property has been on the marketplace, the extended average of any individual market. So again, we're doing auctions at the moment from Southern California, Northern California, Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, Canada, Mexico, out to Florida, Tennessee, New York, Maine, Texas, Colorado, Oklahoma, Utah. We're doing all of these places at the moment.
Long list.
And yeah, long list. So again, and that's from a range of properties from $45 million in Bel Air. And I believe that Jesse had one the other day in Southern California for 200,000. Not to say that's your average price point because we're dealing with one at the moment for about 8 million, but I think that the part of this that I want to just give everybody the peace of mind at is that when an agent has a listing and it's over the average days on market, we will typically reach out over email. One of our team will, Matt, Chase, one of the team will be reaching out and saying, hey, is there any way that we could do a presentation to you and show you our auction process so then you could possibly present it to your sellers? Again, it's always through you as the agent. You are always the listing agent. It is always your listing still. All the data is yours. Everything is still yours. It is in the MLS under your information still. The client is still your client. That's one thing that we want to give people peace of mind over. But we would typically do a presentation to the listing agent, walk you through the process so that you've got a really good understanding of what the process looks like before we would ever present it to your sellers. And we're happy to do that same presentation through to your sellers. Now, the opinion of those sellers, once we do that presentation, we will typically get about 9 out of every 10 presentations that an agent allows us to speak to their sellers. The sellers will agree that this makes logical sense and let's move forward. But it's the heightened view that they have of then that listing agent. There is always followed with a compliment saying, hey, thank you so much for bringing us this. Thanks so much for thinking differently. Again, if they don't like it, that's okay as well. Bringing up auction, most of the time, if we do not get the property to go to auction, 100% of the time the seller will do a price reduction because something needs to change. Regardless of whether they say yes to auction, it's still something that then changes for you guys as well. Because you've brought them something different rather than asking them for a price reduction, they go, no, well, we need to change something, and then they will reduce their price at that point in time. I think the auction also opens up a wider scope of people as well. It opens up that wider scope by us being able to reduce the price. I gave the example before of the Bay Area property, $3,599,000 is what it's on at. She would need to reduce it by almost $600,000 in order to attract a really different audience to that property, because anybody at that price point, okay, they would be looking at the property if they were at $3 million anyway. But realistically is that the sellers aren't in a mindset to do so. But what we're talking to them about doing with their auction process, we're going to do a bidding to start from at $2.5 million on that property. That's an advertised list price at $2.5 million. Their seller's always protected with their non-disclosed reserve, so they're not obligated to sell. But that opens up the marketplace completely, where a small incremental price decrease might not be enough to bring the total marketplace in that. Have you seen that before, Jesse? Like where a small price reduction just doesn't change anything?
Doesn't do much. I mean, if we went down to the smaller price range, maybe not the 200,000, but let's be honest, going down into small increment, it's not going to do much on an amortized loan, but it's going to save them 10, 15 bucks a month. It's not enough to motivate a buyer. And we have to bring into the conversation interest rates because they are high.
Yeah.
Right. And then when you're on the other end of the spectrum and you're on the higher price range, $100,000, it's not enough. It's not enough to get the attention of a buyer. We just had a listing the other day that was previously on the market with another agent. Really nice home, great home. And what I'm finding, Ben, is I'll pause here actually, is I'm finding that there's two types of properties out there. And this is, South Florida, this is Southern California, this is pretty much everywhere. You're either getting no showings, or you're getting showings but no offers. People are just circling. There's no motivation, there's no sense of urgency, and there's no competition, which I believe auction brings, right? Those are all three things that we have.
Regardless of whether, regardless of whether they're a fact, it brings it regardless. Like you could have one person interested, but the perception of auction day, the lead up to auction itself creates that environment.
It's huge. So we took this property to auction. Now the seller was hesitant he wanted to work with us, but he was actually hesitant to sign the paperwork. And one of the reasons why was, hey, look, Jesse, I have a few people circling. And those people have been circling for like 3 months, but they hadn't put pen to paper to write up an offer. Well, we flipped it to auction. We sold it in about 10 days at the price that he wanted. But here's what I loved about the auction is that we had so many people come through the property that said either one, hey, we'd been looking at this property for some time, right? But this was the first time they were actually there to see it. Or two, hey, I've been looking for a home like this over the past 4 or 5 months, right? And I'm thinking in my head, I'm thinking, it's been on the market, not with me, but somebody else for a while. It was just never on anybody's radar because the previous agent was making those small incremental price reductions. And it wasn't enough to compel a buyer to say, I'm going to stop everything I have going on in my busy life to come see this property. And that's half the battle with us as listing agents, with this struggle with the prices maybe being too high, is that we're not getting any attention on the property. We're not getting the phone to ring, and we're not getting physical showings. We ended up happening in a collective 4 hours, over 60 groups of people through the house. It was a great example of what the auction was able to do. It compelled a buyer to come actually see the property. Now we have something to work with. Right? That was powerful.
Well, Jesse, I think that there's another part of this that maybe people would be thinking of as well, is what if they do this with auction and then all of a sudden they do drop that price, but no one turns up? My response to that, would be like, let's say that work the opposite. Like you've sold the seller on this process and then you've dropped the bidding to start from and no one turns up. I think that gives us a really finite understanding of how difficult that property is going to be to sell in the marketplace. And it gives you an understanding, one, if you're an agent, of a bad investment of your time in order to move forward and try and sell something that's going to be that difficult. And two, what is your seller's expectations and making sure that you don't bring that relationship to a point of fracture. I think that it just gives real clear indication answers, because you are able to do it through the auction process with no risk to the sellers because they're never obligated to sell because they have a non-disclosed reserve. And it gives you a really clear snapshot into the marketplace. Do you think that's fair if it goes the wrong way?
Yeah, I mean, we touched on this, I think, before we started, is there are some listings that we take on that we probably shouldn't. And, there's not many homes selling right now, right? The pool of listings is much smaller. And if you're an experienced, good agent, you're capturing still some of those, but maybe not as much as you used to. So every listing is a paycheck. I mean, that's the reality of it. And, coming out of the 2020, 2021 market, we saw some crazy things happening. You throw something at the wall and it was sticking. And so there's still a little bit of that in our head too. Well, maybe we find that one buyer, but at some point we have to say to ourselves, hey, look, we can't help you, right? It's bad business on our part. We're not in the business here to spend a lot of money and time on a listing if it's not going to sell. And if a auction bidding to start from price wasn't enough to motivate a buyer to come see a property, a small incremental price drop, had they kept it traditional and came down a little bit, wasn't going to do that either. And so it's a good time to have that heart to heart with that seller and say, hey, what do you want to do? Because maybe we're just better off going our separate ways.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes, we can be a very good ally in that conversation for the agent to actually help them have that conversation. And it can come from us, not them, so they can maintain their relationship and get the listing back at a future date. But I think I just want to segue because I don't want to be too long in our session today, Jesse. I want to be courteous of everyone's time. And I don't want to age this recording, but also I don't want to age the comments I'm about to make. But I think that it's important just to understand, today is the 19th of June, it's 2024. And it's an incredibly interesting time in a lot of real estate marketplaces. You and I were having a conversation before we officially started this session about the South Florida marketplace and some of the nuances, and that we believe that that market is catching up to the rest of the country. I just want to make comment on a few markets that we're in at the moment and talk about them, where auction is becoming it's funny when you run Harcourts auctions and you run our company, Jesse. You've seen this, obviously being part of it now, and I know that Matt and Chase and a few of the other team members have seen this as well. You start to see what marketplaces are struggling the most and that have got really stagnated movement, because we get a lot of inbound interest. So for example, Southern California and the LA marketplace at the moment, the luxury price points, you've seen this, Jesse, is that anything over $5 million, one, the volume of competition that you have on the marketplace against that listing, and two is that the volume of listing, the volume of days on market is doubled, tripled, quadrupled. It could be something to do with the mansion tax and things along those lines, but I think that the one thing that, like, we're getting a lot of inbound people reaching out to us going, hey, we need help with our traditional listing there. There was a time when it's actually slowed down a little bit, but Denver, Colorado, above $2 million, a lot of those parties were being called back to the Bay Area because of the tech, the tech side of things, excuse me. But that marketplace was saturated, and we saw a lot of inbound from there. We're seeing a lot of inbound from Texas in the Houston and Dallas marketplaces at the moment, with those markets aren't moving. It's funny. The other market that is kind of got me a little spooked, to be honest, because I don't know how it's going to end, is Arizona. Obviously, these particular areas of Arizona, like if we were to take the Phoenix, Scottsdale marketplace in the high end, anything above $2 million, anything that's an Airbnb or short-term rental, we've got a situation where we have an auction there at the moment, and we've converted it. And it's one of those situations where we've had to have a conversation with agent and seller to go, guys, I think you just need to think about a different time to put this on the market, or you may need to substantially change your expectations, because this property has over $175,000 worth of income already booked and logged for the remainder of the year. The price point of this property is bidding to start from at $1.7 million. We should buy this. Like, technically, from an investment perspective, if the seller would let it go somewhere between 1.7 and 2 million with $175,000 worth of income that's already booked on it as an Airbnb, someone should buy that, because that is an incredible investment. But I wouldn't put my own money there at the moment. And the reason I wouldn't is because of the marketplace is so saturated and so slow. I would go as far as to say that marketplace is probably one of the most affected marketplaces from an inventory perspective. Now, don't get me wrong. Is there going to be this cataclysmic situation that happens? No, because everybody's not selling because they need the money from a perspective of, I've got loans of X amount of dollars that need to be paid off. Some people have hard money loans, and those people will be the natural rate of foreclosures and whatever it may be. But there's a great deal. I mean, over 80% of the people that we're dealing with, they could make a decision just to lock it up and let it sit there for a while because of the equity they have in their homes. Now, that's one marketplace. The Tennessee marketplace is a marketplace where I can understand that Arizona's marketplace is saturated. It really saw a lot of growth. I would go as far as to say that, it's almost as expensive as Southern California areas of Arizona. Okay. But that said, is that Tennessee was one of those states that a lot of people were moving to, and was padded for a long time because it had the migration pattern of there, right? Oregon and the Pacific Northwest is still on fire, being Oregon, Washington, okay? They are still on fire. They're still getting a lot of people moving there. It is still moving really well at particular price points. Under $2.5 million is just flying off the handle still. It's great. Whereas Tennessee, $800,000, $500,000, $2 million, doesn't matter. It is slow. You're not seeing the same migration pattern there anymore. And I don't know if that's happening with Florida, Jesse. That's where I wanted to get to at the moment. What are you seeing in the Florida market, or the South Florida market, where let's face it, that's where the market is. Okay, like that's where the primary, like that's where you're moving to. Is that there's a lot of hype around Miami, and there has been a lot of hype around Miami, a lot of tech startups, a lot of remote workers, or big push around lifestyle. But that seems to be sort of drawing to a little bit of a close.
It's definitely slowed. I mean, you and I saw that article that I sent a few weeks ago, talking about it was like the 25 major metropolitan areas that are seeing some of the slowest days on market, or most price reductions. It was one of the two, and it was like 85% of it was Florida, not just South Florida, but Florida in general.
Right.
And I think similar to Tennessee, it grew fast, maybe too fast, right? During the pandemic, everybody moved there. And so you're starting to see the effects of that. Move fast, it's going to slow quickly as well. I mean, it's all cyclical.
Yeah.
So I do see that. I'm not worried about it in the sense, but here's the struggle I think we have as agents, is that things have slowed down. As real estate agents, we're trying to put deals together. But the wedge that we have is most sellers don't have to sell. And
Right.
that's the problem that we have right now versus,
Right.
other times in the US where, there was fire sales, or, you had bad loans, or you had no equity, whatever it may be. The economy was in a very tough position, jobs. Right now, the struggle we have, I think I would say across the country, is most sellers don't really have to sell. And
Yeah.
that's the problem that you have. So you have somebody that's stuck on a price, and we're not able to actually convince them to lower their price from a traditional standpoint. I think that's the bigger concern that I have, and that's why I think
I
auction
think
comes in.
I
Go
think
ahead.
that's a really good statement, mate. I really think for the general market for primary residence. Do you know where? But like, I've had more Airbnb properties on. I've got more Airbnb properties on our auction platform at the moment than I've ever had. For example,
Mm,
Broken Bow in Oklahoma. Tennessee, there's a lot there as well. We've got some stuff coming on in Utah as well. Alabama, there's some stuff there too. And these are pretty pricey properties. But the reason that the sellers have got them all on the marketplace at the moment, because their 2023 and 2022 financial numbers were really good, but the bookings for the first 6 months of this year have been really, really bad. So a lot of
yeah.
people have been spooked into it. And that's one of the things where I think that that's where I can see some erosion of value right now. Like these people have purchased these properties or purpose built these properties. A lot of them aren't just homes that were turned into short-term rentals. These are homes that were built for short-term rentals, right?
Yeah.
I think I would go as far as say we've 8 or 9 of them at the moment. And that is where I can see that market really suffering. Primary residential marketplace, no. Like
Yeah.
at the end of the day, people are going to hold it. They've got equity, all the stuff. They'll just stay put. A lot of them have locked in really good mortgages and whatever it is. But a lot of these people have bought these properties and are servicing these properties. Some of them might have got really good financing terms on them, but you're going to see a pretty big erosion of equity away because of their 2024 numbers of bookings or income. But that just was that's just one thing that, again, I'm dealing with a lot of it at the moment. That seems to be the sticking point in a lot of the markets, because sellers of primary residentials are comparing their homes in Arizona, are comparing their homes in Oklahoma, comparing their homes in Utah, comparing their homes in Tennessee to these short-term rental homes. Like, I know for a fact on the Newport
Yeah.
Peninsula at the moment, we've got a triplex coming onto the marketplace, and it has been purpose built for Airbnb. It's got a short-term rental license, which is worth its weight in gold. Okay. It can be removed at any point, by the way, but they are
Sure.
asking an astronomical amount for these properties because of the income that they bring in, the cash flow that they bring in. And you know what? That's in a marketplace where it's a very tightly held short-term market. It's very difficult to get short-term rentals. It's probably one that you might want to purchase in, and you'd have some security there. But what then happens is that the property 3 doors down, that we've also got another property that's just a primary residential single-family home. They see the prices per square foot that
Hmm.
they're asking for those income properties, right? Short-term income properties. And then they compare their primary resident to that. And I'm saying there's an inflation there of $2 or $3 million of what these sellers are looking for based on those. And I think that there's just this muddy water that there needs to be
You're comparing
clarified.
apples to oranges, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
exactly right.
think, you have these sellers that don't want to sell, but I think from an agent, for those that are watching from a tactical standpoint, right? I see opportunity there.
Mm,
right? We can look at it and we can say, well, sellers don't have to sell. Maybe I shouldn't take that listing on. But how many listings have you seen that, were previously listed with another agent, didn't sell? And then that very next agent, right, comes in and gets the property sold at the price that
absolutely.
you were suggesting. It happens all the time. And
Absolutely.
I think the difference between the two, right, is the education that you're giving the seller, the time that you're putting in, the trust that you're putting in with that seller over time to get them to realize that, hey, look, your property's not worth what you think it's worth.
Yeah.
I look at every opportunity with a seller. I look at it in two different parts. I look at it as getting the listing and then the listing itself. Right. And we always talk about marketing. I think marketing is great. But what I'm seeing right now, the common denominator to a lot of these listings that are just sitting there in South Florida and other markets is that they have really good marketing and it's not selling. So we have to now look at this and say, well, how important is marketing? It's very important, but is it enough to sell the home? I believe right now that the marketing is helping to sell the agent at the
Yeah.
listing presentation. But I believe it's the education, right, to the seller that is helping to sell the home during
Yeah.
the listing period. And, it
Absolutely.
reminds me of a home that we had, a listing that we had in La Jolla, where the owner wanted, I think it was 7 million.
Mm.
And it was listed with a really, really good agent that does a lot of business down here. And that agent couldn't sell the property and actually came to us and said, hey, look, I'm not a Harcourts agent, but the seller wants 7 million. I was able to get him 6.2. He said no. You guys should try to take it on. I'm going to recommend you. And so
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
came in. We got an accepted offer at 6.2. And it was one of those that, a few weeks later, we asked the owner, hey, why did you accept our 6.2? But you didn't accept the 6.2 previously. And the owner said, well, that agent didn't bring me any showings. I had one offer and we just kind of sat there. And
Yeah.
there was never really any interest.
Process
And
of elimination.
exactly. Now he knew that previous agent was doing a lot of work and spent a lot of money and obviously no doubt had the skills and the chops to sell the home. But when we came in, the volume of showings, the volume of offers that we were able to provide to him, although he didn't necessarily want to accept the 6.2, at that point he was reasonable to say, look, there's nothing else out there. And I think that we have to think about that as a seller. If we look to go find another agent, it's because we feel that other agent is going to find the buyer that the previous or the current agent hasn't been able to find. But when you bring in a volume of people like the auction does, right, it starts educating that seller and thinking to themselves, heck, I wanted the 7 million, but
Yeah.
maybe it's not really worth the 7 million anymore. And that's not me,
Mm.
hammering him into saying your home's not worth. I'm letting the market actually speak by providing more evidence.
Jesse, there's 2 points that I want to close this out on because again, I cannot not just obviously make those points because you've just made some really clear things that pop up for us all the time. I think that's a really good example of actually process of elimination as we've been speaking about. But there's also this thing called the hidden expectation. Do you know the volume of properties that I've ever done? And I know you know this as well, that I've walked in the door from a third party perspective and the seller has got one in South Carolina at the moment. Okay. This property is close to Columbia. It's a very, very large price point for that area. At the moment, the sellers, sort of, they've been priced anywhere from $4 million to $3.5 million traditionally. They set their non-disclosed reserve. I'm not going to say the exact number, but it was about $1 million less than their last advertised price.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was just literally a conversation where I had the listing agent on the phone, I had them on the phone, and I said, so guys, what is the expectation here? What's the number that you would accept for the property? What would be your non-disclosed reserve? They said XXX, and I don't want to disclose it because it's a live auction at the moment, but like the listing agent called me after that phone call and goes, oh my God, I had no idea that they would ever accept that. And that's not no shade against that agent because he was asking the entire time. It was just somebody completely different. I would say that happens 5 out of every 10 times is that the reserve price that is set, the agent never knew that the seller would actually accept a number that low. Okay. So again, that's one thing that I want to point out, but also you just mentioned the marketing's great. The marketing's selling the agent. The best marketing in the world will remain superfluous and irrelevant based on the price of that property. The best home in the world remains unsold based on price. And you can't market a property effectively when it has the wrong price on it. You could spend millions of dollars on marketing and none of it could ever hit because of the one part of it that is wrong, which is the indication of price. So just remember that. That's what auction allows you to do, is have more effective marketing by casting a wider net. Okay. I think that today, we've hit on some really good points, Jesse. I think that, first of all, it's always fantastic for you and I to connect on this stuff. So if no one else has gotten anything out of this, then hey, I've enjoyed our time as always.
Been a good 42 minutes.
That's right. But again, thank you for those that have tuned in that are here live at the moment. We're going to be sending out the recording to our network as well. Hopefully we can be of value. If you have any interest in learning a little bit more and upskilling yourself from a Harcourts auction perspective, please reach out to myself. Jesse can help out as well. Any one of our team that is available, go to harcourtsauctions.com. Simply go to the contact us page, or you'll see us on social, or you'll see us somewhere. Okay, check out some of the properties that we've got. But we'd love to set up a 20-minute Zoom conversation with you where we can walk you through the process, give you an understanding of it, so it's another tool in your tool belt. If you've got a specific property in mind, we would love to sit down and analyze that with you whilst giving you an understanding of the process as well. But thanks again for tuning in, and looking forward to hopefully seeing you soon. Thanks, everybody. Jesse, thank you.
Of course, buddy. Is that good?
That's great. We're good here.
Yeah. Awesome, man. All right.
Thank you, are we doing a buzz after this?
Yeah. Give me a call, and then next week we'll jump on again.
Awesome. Thank you, bud.
Sounds good, buddy. Thanks.
So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.